Hi. For those of you who do not know me, excuse me, my name is Nate Jones. I want to bring to your attention, for those of you who do not know, how did we get here? And when I say how did we get here, I'm talking about this life we know, as we know it now. How did all this start? Where did we come from? How did we get here? I want to talk to you baby boomers and this new generation that knows how to get facts and that knows how to do some research. I'm going to give you a story. I'm not going to give you a whole lot of Bible verses. I'm just going to talk to you face to face and just give you something to research for yourself if you choose to do so. I'm going to give it to you how it came to me. But I'm going to give it to you Nate Jones style. In the beginning was God. God is a social being, meaning that He loves creation. And the beings that He creates, He likes and loves them to have interactions with Himself. God is love. And the fundamental principle in love is choice. The ability to choose. It's like when you have a relationship with someone close to you. You want to hear their opinions. You may like strawberry ice cream. And they can come to you and say, not too fussy about strawberry. I like chocolate. That fundamental difference is the bedrock of love. The ability to allow difference. In the beginning, God created the angels. And there was one notable angel that had the preeminence over all the angels. And his name was Lucifer. Again, I'm just talking to you face to face, and I'm just giving you some stuff, and you can fact check me, and just bear with me. The angel's name was Lucifer. Lucifer was unlike all the other angels because of the composition by which he was designed and by which he was made. God done something special with him simply because how God wanted to use him was unlike any other. God stooped down from around his throne, picked up some gems from around his throne, and fashioned a creature and called him Lucifer. Now you have to understand what the name Lucifer means and what it refers to. The name means light bearer. You ever seen a stone, a gemstone, and put it up to the light? It ricochets, the light is ricocheted off of it in dazzling beauty. And because God created Lucifer to be able to be within his presence, it stands to reason why God made him from the very gem in his presence, which gave Lucifer the ability to be in God's presence because he was made up of gems from in God's presence. Don't want to get too deep. Just want to give you set the stage on who this character, this being was. His name was Lucifer. And God had fashioned Lucifer with the ability to sing 4-part harmony at one time. His pipes in his throat were so designed that he could sing all the parts of harmony perfectly at the same time. And he was designed to do so because God made him the chorister, the one who set the stage, the ambiance for the decor of heaven. If God had something that he wanted to say that was of special note, Lucifer would gather the team together and they would set the stage and they would set the ambiance for that speech or that proclamation and so on and so forth. Lucifer was the go-to person for the music in heaven. If someone was not pitched correctly, he would know this because he could sing every part and he knew how the part should go. But of course, he never had that problem because everything was perfect. Outside of Lucifer, there was another being. His name was Michael. When you understand Michael, you can understand Jesus. But I'm jumping ahead of the gun because Jesus is not relevant to this story because Jesus was not thought of at this point. Put your seatbelt on. Come with me now. You got it. Keep up. This Michael, the counterpart to Lucifer, he was the general, the Lord of hosts is his name, the authority of the angels. But if you was to look at both of them, Lucifer had the light from the presence of God the Father ricocheting from him, so his beauty was unmistakable. When Michael would walk past, there was no form or comeliness that he would be recognized above his station. He was Michael. But everyone knew that when Michael spoke, it was on behalf of the Father. Thus, the name Michael means one like God, or like God. That's what the name means. It means like God. So when the angels got together, when Lucifer came down, everyone gathered together because they wanted to know what was the next gig. You know, what were they getting ready to do this time? What was the song to be sung for what occasion, and so on and so forth. But when Michael spoke, it was more authoritative in terms of this what needs to be done, and thus and so, on behalf of the Father. And it just so happened that on one occasion, when Lucifer came down from the presence of the Father, as I said to you before, when you take a gemstone and you put it up to the light, it emanates from the light. The light emanates from the gemstone. The more the light gets to be reflected, the more glorious the stone becomes, or so it seems. And of course, Lucifer comes down from the presence of the Father. He's not aware to any great extent of what the angels are seeing. He just responds to their responding to him. And the angels with oohs and ahs, they start to look at him and they say, whoa. And it's like, and there's like, you're beautiful. At some point, this gets a little bit too invigorating, to say the least. And Michael sees what's going on, and he pulls him aside and he says, look, you have to be careful with that. I can't say for sure what Michael said to him, except to know that Michael had gave him a caution concerning the accolades of the angels and the pocketing of the praise. And I use the word pocket because what Lucifer in effect was doing is that he was taking unto himself the glory that belonged to God alone. That light was not his, because he himself has no light. It's like the moon. The moon has no light of its own. It's reflecting the sun. If you cut the sun off, the moon will be in total darkness because it's only reflecting the sun. So in effect, what Michael was saying to Lucifer is that you have no light. So if there is any praise, you need to give that to God. And Michael left him with something similar to that, because I can't say for sure what they talked about. I just know that he went to Lucifer and had to this type of discussion. Instead of Lucifer taking to heart what Michael had said, he didn't. So he went to the angels and he started to whisper to a few of them, and he went to them and said something similar to this, like, were you guys trying to praise me at all? And they were like, no. Why would we do that? It's like, oh, okay, because I'm just wondering. And of course, when you give that type of response, the angels are thinking, what's going on? So a little murmur began to filter to the ranks of the angels. Before long, that murmuring became a little bit concerning. The Father, seeing what's going on, and decides that he's going to call a meeting. And incidentally, if you ever heard of Ellen White, you go and get the book Story of Redemption, and the book The Great Controversy, and the book Patriarchs and Prophets. And what I'm telling you, this story is all through those books, especially why was sin permitted? Story of Redemption takes you through what I'm saying to you. But anyway, Lucifer began this gossip type, innuendo type setting situation, and this is what led God the Father to make a proclamation. God called all the angels together and he summoned them. And he put Michael front and center and said to all of the angels, I am making a law. When you see Michael, relate to him as if you relate to me. Give him the homage that you would give me. Of course, this did not sit too well with Lucifer, because up to that point, no such law had ever been enacted. So Lucifer took offense to that. And the reason why he took offense to that is because now there is a major difference between him and Michael. The Father didn't make no mention of him. So why did he have to make a law to place Michael in any type of eminence to that extent? So now Lucifer has an attitude. He's not happy. So he goes to the angels and he tells them that Who does God think he is? And why is there necessary for a law? We are angels. We do good by virtue of the fact of who we are. We don't need a law to tell us to be good. We are good. So now Lucifer is telling the angels that there is a problem. So he tells them that if he will not allow them to be abused in the way that he felt that he is being abused. Now, while there is problem in heaven, problem is not really that big of a deal. I mean, it's a major situation because now you have hurt feelings and now you have questionings. And you have to understand God the Father. Yeah. So the Father calls Michael into the throne room. When Michael goes into the throne room, the mountain of God, where Lucifer has access to, Gabriel was called. And if you know the name Gabriel, Gabriel means gatekeeper. Gabriel was called and he was stationed to the door that led into the mountain of God, and he was told to hold the gate. So when Lucifer came toward the gate as if to go up into, Gabriel stopped him and said, "You can't go up inside." Now you have to understand, Gabriel is such a humble angel. He's just a gatekeeper. But if you know anything about God, God is never caught off guard. And so when God, in effect, created Gabriel, he created him, I suppose, with all kinds of bulky biceps and triceps that really didn't mean nothing in heaven, because it's almost like having a police officer in paradise. What's this for? What's that for? What? And poor Gabriel was like, I don't know what they're for. I just know I have them. You know. It's like a police officer with all this artillery in the perfect surroundings of heaven. I mean, what is it for? And he didn't know what they're for, because he was no real reason for them. But all of a sudden, when God asked him to keep his posts and don't let nobody come up, when Lucifer, this big burly, intimidating figure, came up to the gate as if to go up into the very throne room of God, I'm sure Gabriel didn't know what he looked like when he said to Lucifer, "You can't go up." And Lucifer was like, you're talking to me? And Gabriel was like, yeah. And the other angels that were looking on, poor Gabriel didn't have any idea what he looked like when he was talking to Lucifer. It's like when you're talking to somebody, you don't know your expressions. And I'm sure that the biceps and the triceps and the lights that emanated from his person was of such where Lucifer was like, okay, no big deal, cool. And Gabriel was like, in other words, Gabriel was simply obeying God. He was at his post and he was told not to let nobody go up. And that's simply what he was prepared to do. So that when the other angels looked on and saw all this commotion, I can almost imagine what was going through their minds. What is going on? Well, that was the last straw. And incidentally, when Michael was called in unto the presence of the Father to discuss what was taking place before their very eyes, they knew that Lucifer was getting to a place where he had to be stopped. And for the mere fact that he was questioning God the Father, the Father was like, you better get him. And when the Father was saying to the Son, you better get him, only Michael knew exactly where the Father was going with this. Because you see, the Father has only one juice for sin. It's not a cocktail. It's not a slight beverage. When the Father deals with sin, pow, out. But the thing is that if the Father was allowed to do what he would do for sin at that point, heaven would have been disrupted because no one would have served God except for fear. They would have feared him forever. And Michael was like, no, let's not do that. So both the Father and Michael decided that they would deal with this in such a way where all of heaven and eternity could be benefited. They would deal with Lucifer, but they would not deal with him immediately. And so a plan was enacted. While God was having a meeting, Lucifer and the other angels were having a meeting. And incidentally, Lucifer had sympathizers that numbered over half of the angels. Now, I don't need to tell you what over half of the angels would do to somebody like Lucifer. It would give him a sense of power that, because what is God going to do? Is he going to kill us all? Is he going to destroy us all? No. God, he didn't think God would do that. So it gave him a sense of power. So he was meeting with the angels in one quadrant of heaven, and Michael and the Father was in the throne room discussing the creation of men. And why did God feel it necessary to create men? Well, God wanted to demonstrate to the angels just why law, whatever God say is law and should be law, and just why law is important. Because up to then, there was no laws ever enacted. And this was the first law that God had instituted, meaning when you see Michael, you relate to him as if you relate to God himself, which is the Father. So they decided that they were going to create men for the purpose of demonstrating to the universe what God is like and why law is important. And while Michael and the Father were in the throne room, and Lucifer and over half of the angels were citing their dissatisfaction, especially about the part where Lucifer was not allowed to go up into the throne room, and how Gabriel was like, with all his to-do and his, they was like, this is weird, this is strange. And there were some of the faithful angels who went to Lucifer and to the crowd of angels that were dissatisfied and that were disgruntled with everything that was going on, and they reminded them how that Michael was from the beginning. Does the rule negate what he has been all this time? We have always looked at Michael as unto God, and we always took Michael's word as if it was coming directly from God. So what makes this so different than what we've been doing all this time? And then some of the angels began to think about it, and it was like, well, you're right, because, we have always looked at Michael as equal with God. We have always obeyed Michael as unto God. So this law doesn't make any difference. It's just that it only makes things more real as opposed to implied. And so some of them began to understand exactly what they should do. So little by little, Lucifer began to lose his ranks. When Michael came down from the plan in making man to deal with this problem that seems to be brewing, some angels met him and they began to tell him about their dissatisfaction and how that they were sorry about, how they misjudged him, misjudged the Father. And of course, Michael told them that it's okay, it's understandable, and it's no problem. Just go back to your duties. And little by little, when the angels found out that they were able to go back and that they could make it right with Michael without an issue, many of them began to do that. And so what used to be half was dwindled down to 1/3 of the angels. And the third were getting ready to do likewise. And when Lucifer realized that he was losing his status, he said to 1/3 of them, he said, listen, rather than you go talk with him, let me go and do it for you. Let me go and make all this thing right. And I will come back and give you word about what happened. And they, of course, said, okay, because they didn't feel any way about it. And they decided that, okay, yeah, that sounds like a feasible plan. So they waited for him to do exactly that. So Lucifer goes to Michael and he says, listen, can I talk with you? And of course, Michael says, sure. And what's on your mind? And he says, I may have jumped the gun and I may have said some things that were not correct. And, I want things to go back to how they were. But Michael had some sad news for Lucifer. Michael said to Lucifer, yeah, okay, well, yeah, so we can work something out for you, but you can't go back up in the throne room, of course, but I can get another position for you. And Lucifer looked at him and said, say what? And Michael was like, yeah, another position can be found for you, but you can't have that position that you once held. You can't have that. And Lucifer looked at Michael with contentment and anger, because his pride would not allow him to take any other position than the one that he was used to. So he decided at that moment that if he couldn't have it, he'll take it by force. So he turned away from Christ, agitated and angry. And Michael understood what it meant, but he didn't say anything. He just let him go do what he did. So Lucifer went back to the third of the angels, and he said to them that it's too late for us, which was an outright lie. So the angels were upset because they didn't understand why is it okay for the other angels to go back and recant, but it was not good for them. And Lucifer quickly said to them, don't worry, because what has happened is unjust. But that's not really what really happened, now is it? He put his situation and made it their situation. But because they did not go for themselves, there was no excuse for what came next. Lucifer lied to them. And before long, there was war in heaven. The Bible says that Lucifer and his angels fought against Michael and his host. And of course, the rest is history. But here is the point. When Lucifer fell like lightning out of heaven, and he ended up in total darkness, it was only then that he began to understand that, oh, I'm not going to win this fight. This is serious. Up until then, darkness was never associated with angels. Angels did not know anything about a life in darkness. They were privileged to be a part of the glorious lights of heaven. And especially Lucifer, who is a gemstone. You can't take a gemstone and just lock it away in darkness. What is that? But for the first time in his existence, when he was shut in total darkness, it broke him. Of course, the story has it that when God had sent an angel on Aaron and Lucifer saw him, he called out to the angel. And of course, the angel thought that he had to bow up because he knew he was going into the arena where Lucifer was. But Lucifer was like, no, I'm not trying to fight with you. I just want you to give Michael a heads up and tell him that I need to see him. So when he finished coming back from doing what he was doing and making his way to the celestial city, presenting his golden card and going into the city, he said to Michael, on his way out, he was accosted by Lucifer, who simply just wanted to have a talk with him. So of course Michael elects to go out and talk with Lucifer. And when Michael comes to Lucifer in tears and sadness says to him, says, listen, you won. I was wrong. He says, I'm willing to take any position that you give me now. I don't care what it is. I'm willing to do it. And Michael in tears says to him, I'm sorry. But when you allowed yourself to get to the place where you fought to take by force what was not yours to have, heaven can no longer trust you in its ranks. And there's nothing more that can be done except what God has in store for you in the future. When Michael said those words to Lucifer, that deep-seated hatred that you now know of Lucifer, or now the devil, was born at that moment. Lucifer went from being Lucifer to the arch enemy of God, the devil. It's almost like when somebody says, I love you, but then when they can't get what they want, that other side shows up. That's where that comes from. The devil was born. So you say, how did we get here? How did all of this begin? One day, Michael steps out into the same darkness where Lucifer was. And Michael simply said, let there be light. Both the good angels and the evil angels, they looked, and then they looked at one another. Michael. The evening and the morning was the first day. And then they heard the Father say, let us make man in our image. Michael stooped down in the clay and fashioned a man and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And man became a living soul. Of course, you know the story from here, how that God took Adam, and from him he made Eve, and how Lucifer was able to dupe the pair into sin. And the Bible, of course, is clear where it says that to whom you yield yourself servant to obey, his servant you are, to whom you obey. And because Lucifer was able to use the serpent to get man to disobey God, the scepter of the earth was given to Lucifer by default, and he became the prince of the power of the air in this world. But God uses men to show the universe what God is like. The laws that govern men, and God told Adam, of all the trees in the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou mayest not eat thereof, for in the day you eat thereof you shall surely die. When the angels looked on and they saw how God had created a law as it related to them, and they saw what happened when Adam and Eve disobeyed God. And of course, Lucifer looked on and he said, aha, how can God destroy them without giving them mercy? And how can God give them mercy when he said, if thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die? So he smiled and said to himself, I got God now. He can't destroy them and still be God. And he can't not destroy them and still be God. Now they will understand that what I was saying was true all along. God is unjust with his laws and his rules. The angels looked on in sadness. And they sympathized with Lucifer because they realized that, Lucifer just got caught up. And he really didn't understand what was going on. So they felt. But all through the tenure of man's existence, the angels began to see a pattern. They saw when Cain killed Abel, and they said, aha. They saw where God gave Cain grace, but what that grace led to, and the angel said, aha. They began to see the nature of sin and how sin robs of peace. And they began to see a pattern, and they said, aha. But in the fullness of time, when Jesus was born, they saw Michael, their beloved commander-in-chief, become a little babe in Bethlehem. And that's when they came a little closer to the earth. And they looked upon the scene with great wonder. When Lucifer, the devil, placed it in Herod's heart to kill all the baby boys, the angels began to see a pattern. Up to that point, a lot of the angels had lost their sympathy for Lucifer. But there was still some that was still a little bit. But when they saw how Jesus was threatened through his life, when Lucifer asked him to fall down and worship him, more angels began to say, no. But when the devil told the crowd to crucify him, all sympathy was gone. So that when Jesus hung his head and said, it is finished, there was no more sympathy for Lucifer. It was done. And now, when the Father does his strange act, and believe me, when the Father does what he's going to do with sin that he would have did before, but waited until the understanding of sin had reached a peak whereby the angels can understand, because they saw themselves in men. How we treated Jesus is how they treated Michael. They didn't know. And it was God's way of showing them. And the angels was like, because they understand how we treat Christ. Some of us say he's not God. how can you call a man God? And they see themselves in us. Because when Michael was as an angel of light, they didn't see him as God, as the way he was and is. Because he never took upon that form. He never walked around as if he was all of that. He was, Jesus, he's humble. Michael, he's humble. But when Michael stood out on the darkness and said, "Let there be light," the angel's like, and so that when Jesus was on the earth and he asked his disciples, "Whom do men say that I am?" the angels was looking, because they wanted to know, who do you all think he is? I'm closing now. There's so much to this story, and I'm trying to condense it in a short space of time, but it's very difficult. But I want to bring you to where you are and where I am, because we have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Would you believe God the Father takes things very personal? If in this life you can have faith to trust God by accepting Jesus as your personal Savior, the Father has a special gift for you. I can't go into the ramifications of the gift and what it is and all these. All I can tell you is, eye has not seen, nor ear heard, neither has it entered into the hearts of men, the things that God has prepared for those that love him. The Bible simply says, without faith, it's impossible to please God. You do not know the reason for your existence now. All I can say to you is, don't get caught up in this life and lose out on eternal life simply because you didn't know and you didn't understand. Take the time out and dig into what I just explained to you and what I just told you. Because what comes next is beyond your wildest imagination. My name is Nate Jones. I can go on, but I'm going to stop now. I don't want the video to be overly long, but just thought I'll share that with you.